Hi, I'm Ann Hardesty, and welcome to the People's News. You were just watching footage from August 28th, 1963, which was the March on Washington, a historic event that brought 250,000 people to Washington, D.C. to demand justice. The marchers' primary goals were to seek justice around issues of jobs, police brutality, education, housing. 1963 was a time in this country that African Americans were not considered full citizens, and the marchers were there from all races, all creeds, to ask the U.S. government to address this inequity. Here we are, 50 years later, and first we want to pay tribute to those civil rights leaders who had the vision for the 1963 march. And we are here in Portland preparing for a celebration here that will happen on Saturday, August 24th, 2013, that will start at 10 a.m. at Terry Shrunk Plaza. I am so pleased to have here in the studio with me Dr. Reverend Leroy Haynes. Dr. Reverend Leroy Haynes is the chair of the Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition for Justice and Police Reform. He is the co-chair of the of the March Committee. He also serves as the pastor for Allen Temple Church in Portland. Welcome.
Yes, I'm just happy to be here today.
It is such a pleasure to have you here, and I have so much admiration for all the work that you've done. So we want to start the program with your remembrance from how old were you and what were you doing on August 28th, 1963?
Well, at the age of 13, I was a youth organizer for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in deep segregation of Beaumont, Texas. My pastor was one of Martin Luther King lieutenants, and we covered the region of Southeast Texas. And we were operating during that time in sitting demonstrations on public accommodation. Every week we were sending students to jail and sitting demonstrations. They would spend the weekend, get out, another group go until we broke down restaurants like Piccadilly Restaurant and other restaurants that were segregated against black citizens. It was a time of a turmoil and a time of freedom struggle. My local church was bombed by the Ku Klux Klan because it was the headquarters for the movement in Beaumont, Texas, and so we had a lot of struggle and difficulty going on. But it was the beauty of the struggle was the people uniting to push the envelope for full citizenship in this country. And this was the height of the time, especially in '63, following Birmingham campaign, which was a very massive campaign where students actually faced the police dogs and water hoses and batons against Bull Connor and the police, and all of that event, and then the Medgar Evers assassination that took place, and those events pivoted what we call the '63 March on Washington, where there was a symbol of civil rights leadership and organizations that gathered together. This actually originated back in 1941 by the great organizer A. Philip Randolph of the Sleeping Porters Union there, that forced the hand of Roosevelt during the war to allow blacks to work on jobs and get equal pay, and also integrated the begin to participate in the military and all units of the military at that, even though it was not fully desegregated. All of this culminated in terms of that A. Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin, and Roy Wilkins, Whitney Young, as well as Dr. Martin Luther King, brought this energy of moving from the Birmingham campaign into the producing the pivotal civil rights legislation of the '64 Civil Rights Bill and the '65 Voters' Rights Bill.
Wonderful. It sounds like you've been in this struggle for a long time.
It's a lifetime struggle for me.
It's a lifetime struggle, and I certainly appreciate that. Clearly, we've seen changes over the years. Yes.
Yes.
But I couldn't help but be struck by the issues that the marchers were really focused on in 1963.
Yes.
And so here we are in 2013, and the top issues are pretty much the same.
Very, very telling. Growing up in segregation and Jim Crow, and there was substantive change through legislature, public accommodation from restrooms to hotels to food. And so those substantive things did change. But the issues, the core issues of jobs and issues of equality and employment, those issues are readily with us today, and we are still faced with the issue of inequality and equity in the job, the education, the housing. Those various issues continue to hunt us, and so the struggle, as we often say in the movement, is a continuous struggle. It is not something it's not a moment in history, but it's a movement. There's a difference between a moment and a movement. The struggle is a way of life. Freedom and justice and equality is a way of life. And the very time that we think that we have achieved it is a time when the counter forces, reactionary forces, will come back and begin to, as what we're seeing now with the Supreme Court decision on the Voters' Rights Bill, Section 4, of taking the teeth of the Voter Rights Bill. Right. There were many when I was not only in SCLC as a youth organizer, but when I was a SNCC organizer and a Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Those issues, we had people to die, blood was spilled, and sacrifice was made for that voter rights bill, and so we have to push that issue as we come together for this march on August the 24th, and for the rewriting of that Section 4 of the voter rights bill.
So once again, if we could let the listeners know, the march in Portland is going to happen on August 24th.
Yes. Yeah, on August the 24th at 10 a.m. we will assemble at Terrace Trunk Plaza, and then we will, once assembled, we will march towards the south waterfront near the Hawthorne Bridge, where we will have the actual rally take place. It will be a combination of civil rights speakers, political speakers, as well as music and entertainment, poetry, conscious radio, a fair that you can bring your family to your children. If you were not old enough to experience 63, this is an opportunity to be in that conscious raising movement that you can experience the future struggle.
Excellent. And so the motto of this march is to educate, motivate, and demonstrate. And so August 24th at 2013 at 10 a.m. at Terrace Trunk Plaza. Again, I am Ann Hardesty, and it's been my pleasure to be your host.
Hi, welcome back to the People's News. My name is Itzli, and for today we're going to be talking with Noah Huckman. of Portland Rising Tide about the recent environmental action on the Columbia River to blockade the river with kayaks, canoes, even yachts. And we're going to be talking to him about why that happened and what it means for the environmental movement in Portland and the broader Northwest and the broader country. So now we're going to be switching to a video of the flotilla blockade on the Columbia River. So, Noah, what's your role in Portland Rising Tide, and how long has Portland Rising Tide been around, and why was it founded as an organization?
Well, Itzli, thank you for having me here. Portland Rising Tide came out of a creation of a national, or rather a North American movement. And Portland Rising Tide, and as well as Portland Rising Tide North America, are committed to addressing the key issues of climate justice. We don't see the issues that we have at hand simply as local environmental issues, or ones that can simply be saved by making Americans or our local communities stabilize. This is something that connects and is part of the world that we live in. How this came about here locally was that for the first time we're seeing the mainstream NGOs which led us in this direction, that promised us through electing the correct people or legislative means that they could save this planet. And I think we can consistently see that we are not going in the direction that we need, that we want, or that is necessary to make the world livable, not only for future generations, but putting this generation directly at risk. So Rising Tide as a structure, all local chapters are completely all volunteer, all independent, and we work sometimes on a national level. This example here up in the Pacific Northwest was actually those mainstream NGOs coming towards us, coming towards away from that middle line, and they came off the fence and came to us saying that they would be willing to give us funding and simply if we wanted to make an action that we wanted to make happen. And what we see this is our overture. This is the precursor that we're going to have to sustained and direct protection of our natural resources here in the Pacific Northwest. And that means no polluting trains for low-income families in the north. That means no extraction for native communities over in areas like Montana or Powder River Basin. And that means no polluting of our ecosystem, either at the ports along the line or polluting families in China. And then that same pollution killing there and then coming back over here. And we believe that we actually have an opportunity to do this, that we can not only stop these expansions from happening, but we can bankrupt the coal companies that are behind this, and we can stop the destruction that's going on in Alberta and prevent a lot of carbon from being released. Is this going to save our environment? I think, it's a dismal outlook on that, but can we make our community strong here in Portland? We believe so.
Okay, you mentioned the term climate justice. I wanted to ask, what does that mean to you and to Rising Tide as a movement, and how is that different from these mainstream ideas of environmentalism and the political language that's used around the environmental movement?
That's an excellent question. If you look at mainstream NGOs, especially in the last 3 election cycles, what they continuously proposed was carbon trading. The idea that we could buy and sell our air. So in order for us to have clean air here in Portland, that pollution, and if you remember, usually carbon's attached to burning things, so even if carbon itself is not deadly or has any negative effects, it's always coupled with criteria pollutants that kill. And those criteria pollutants always happen in communities of color, poor communities, and working class communities. And climate justice is an inclusive look to not only when that happens in the US, but what happens when carbon is released in, let's say, the Philippines and Micronesia. What happens when you start having disbursement of people in Africa or in India? These are regions and people who don't have a stabilized government because of oil extraction, because of carbon extraction, and have a more destabilized life and environment because of the reliance on chemical fertilizer, etc. And then top it all off, you have climate change. And so this is an inclusive view that doesn't focus on Al Gore.
Awesome. So to take it back to the action that happened recently here on the Columbia River, what was the point of that action, and what was the message that you were trying to get across to people? Who was your audience, and what were you trying to say with that?
Well, I really think with the joining of 350 and Credo, and it was a lot of my personal friends who generally are more in a more actional, radical direction. Their parents, their mothers were telling them about this event, and this had a huge outreach across different age lines, and I think that's something that we really need to move towards. And we're taking the next step in direction because this was a purely symbolic march. The symbol that we had behind it is now that we now have 300 people of different income levels, age groups, though I want to say primarily white folk, ready to commit direct action. So ready to break the law in order to commit what people see as a heinous crime towards their communities, towards other communities, and towards the planet itself. And I think we might be at a breaking moment here, where we're moving away from relying on the powers that exist, and doing it ourselves.
Awesome. I had the good fortune to be at the action, and I did notice that the crowd that made up the people who were there was very different from what I'd come to expect as typical at different environmental actions. It wasn't the, sort of Earth First, more lefty types. It was mostly, from what I saw, families, a lot of older folks, a lot of people who I had never seen at environmental actions before, and I was wondering, what do you think is the difference? What made that happen?
I think, so if people aren't familiar with 350.org, it's was a group created by Bill McKibben, and they've been very influential in this current change of direction. Because previously you had groups like Greenpeace, which was about funding individual people to do the kind of activism that Rising Tide does, or Sierra Club that focused on preservation of spaces for enjoyment, but not necessarily for sake for the environment's sake. Bill McKibben is very much in those aspects, and so is 350, but its audience is very much a college-educated, older, upper-income base. And I think in some ways, the joining of groups like Earth First, if you're familiar, is typically younger, poorer, and much more radical. These two forces together, I think, are a very interesting situation for policymakers and for state powers, because they don't know yet how to discipline these people back into obedience. So a willingness for people to literally stop trains and then go back to their temples or their churches and their schools the next day and teach or preach or be in a membership, I think is going to be a new direction.
So what are the time pressures? What are we looking at here in the Northwest in terms of, you said that coal trains are going to be coming through pretty soon, and with this blockade, as I understand it, it was organized in order to demonstrate the ability to block off the Columbia River in case oil was going to be shipped down, right?
Yes, partly. Currently, what we're most worried about, this originally came about from proposals for coal. There are still, I believe, 13 current terminals. I'm not the smartest about the lay of the land on this issue right now, but with the 13 proposals, then they added on natural gas export terminals. And now, in the last 2 months, there's the proposal for the Port of Vancouver, Vancouver, Washington, to have the largest export terminal in the U.S. And what this means is the equivalent of the Exel pipeline is going to be trained through our neighborhoods and our areas. And for those who didn't pick it up because it wasn't widely distributed, over 50 people died in Canada when an oil train came through a small town. 50 people in a small, non-dense town, many of them who simply vanished, who were vaporized. And we're looking at just as many trains coming through a neighborhood, 50 feet long, 3 trains a day, to barge oil up on the Columbia. And I think we all know what that would mean for the Columbia. Oil means spills, and spills will happen. So the question isn't, do we want this, or do we want to say, how do we want our policymakers to say no? It's how are we going to say no? And how loudly are we going to say it? And I think that's the direction we're moving in.
To wrap it up for our last minute here, how can people get involved, and what direction do you see this going in?
So Portland Rising Tide is all volunteer, all inclusive. But being an organizer can often be a lot of work. And it also requires a skill set that we really try to spend the time to develop with people that join us, and try to give them the tools that they need to not only work in the environmental movement, but other movements that they might choose to join. But for a lot of people, it's easier to just volunteer or be an activist. So you can check us out at portlandrisingtide.org, or look at Rising Tide North America for more details. We're having an orientation this Thursday, I believe at Laughing Horse at 6 o'clock. So if you're interested in joining Rising Tide, I'd love to see you there.
Awesome. Cool.
I'd love to see you there, Itzli.
Thank you. And thank you for being on our show today.
Thanks.
Welcome back to the People's News. My name is Ahjamu Umi, and in this segment, we're going to be talking about Black August. Now, Black August is an annual commemoration which recognizes the contributions of those very brave, incarcerated souls who, in California, dared to stand up and wage struggle against the prison industrial complex. It recognizes specifically people like W.L. Nolan, people like the San Quentin Six, Jonathan Jackson, William Christmas, James McLean, and those participants in the Marin County Courthouse action in August of 1970. And of course, Jonathan's big brother, George Jackson, who was executed by the state in the prison complex in August of 1971. Now, this year's Black August is focused on the hunger strike, which is occurring at the Pelican Bay Correctional Institution in Northern California. There's a lot of focus on this hunger strike, which is designed to bring public consciousness to the issue of unjust sentencing and incarceration to the SHU, which is an inhumane space in the penitentiary there that's not fit for a rabid dog, that people who are in the incarcerated there are assigned to for basically nothing to very little infraction at all. And this hunger strike is going on right now. And there's a lot of focus on supporting those who are participating in the hunger strike. And we definitely want to do that. We definitely want to supply whatever material and human assistance to those participating in the strike that we can. But a broader question that isn't being addressed as much is how we can address attention to the overall capitalist power structure which creates and runs the prison industrial complex in the first place. So in this segment, we're going to focus on that question. And to do that, we're going to look at a video clip of the late Kwame Ture of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and before that, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Black Panther Party. In this clip, Kwame is going to be talking about the police intelligence complex as a tool of the capitalist power structure, of which the prison industrial complex is also obviously a part of. And the focus of his words are going to be on how the capitalist power structure uses these institutions like the prison industrial complex to keep the masses of society oppressed. So let's listen to Kwame's words on this subject.
Malcolm X was clear. Martin Luther King himself came to the same position that Malcolm X did. If you would look at the end of his campaign, the Poor People's Campaign was directed against the federal government. Consequently, one of the great things about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X was the ability to grow and to learn from their errors and to publicly demonstrate this growth and this correction of errors before the masses of our people. So from the very beginning, I knew the federal government was never on my side. I knew they could not be on my side. I was not confused, nor was I confused about the Democratic Party, which had at the same time in it a Kennedy and an Eastland. I knew that Kennedy would not sacrifice Eastland for me. And I never thought that could be possible. Consequently, for me, Kennedy was just like Eastland, another racist pig talking sweet honey. So there was no confusion here. But at least I thought somehow I couldn't have assumed that the FBI themselves would be involved. But as we got more and more into work, we were told, and I certainly as a sneak field secretary had many problems with this, that every time there's an incident of burning or shooting or looting or killing or terrorism, that the FBI should be called in the local area of the South. I'll give you clear examples. As a young man, I could say that I cut my teeth in organizing in Greenwood, Mississippi. Greenwood, Mississippi is a Delta town, and as racist as you can get, full of Ku Klux Klan, white citizens, FBI, police, all of them just shooting us for fun. I was told by the by my SNCC superiors that whenever there was an incident, you should go to Greenwood, Mississippi, go to the FBI and make them come and make reports. When I would go into the city hall in Greenwood to get the FBI, I would find them in the office of the police chief just chewing tobacco and swapping jokes about us. This FBI agent would now be forced to leave there, come with me, and go make up a report, and all he would do would make up a report. Of course, I never trusted the FBI. I just thought that they would do their job. But in the early days, the FBI made it clear to us. I'll give you one clear example, historical. In the southern part of the state of Mississippi, there was an African there by the name of Herbert Lee, a strong man, determined man, a man full of consciousness, who recognized that rather than be a slave, he would fight to be free. And Mr. Lee had contacted us and told us to come. He wanted to do some work in the South in the movement there. One of our SNCC superiors, on error, contacted the FBI and told them, well, there's this man, Mr. Herbert Lee, down there. We want to do some work with it. And the FBI gave his name to the local police chief, and Mr. Lee was assassinated within 48 hours. After that, nobody in SNCC looked at the FBI for anything except a chance to shoot these pigs down. We said the FBI gave the information, but the SNCC superiors kept insisting that we call the FBI. Once, when an incident arose where there was some burning of a house and some brutal terrorism, normal life in Mississippi for Africans, the SNCC people called me and said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm not going to do nothing. I'm going to get me some guns, organize our people, and we're going for blood. Oh, well, before you do that, you need to get the FBI. The FBI for what? Well, we need to get the, for what? Well, we know they don't do anything, but we need to get these reports because we're going to sue the FBI for not doing their work, and these reports will help us. Well, I'm an organizer, and I'm a disciplined organizer. I've understood all my life, because all my life I have been in organization, all my life, so I have organizational discipline, something that the overwhelming majority of the masses of my people lack. They simply lack organizational discipline because they've never belonged to any organization. Of course, organizational discipline is necessary. Its first necessity is to inform the individual that there's something more important than he or she, the organization and the principles for which it stands. This is necessary in a country like America, where all aspects of individuality is blown completely out of proportion, where an African will even tell you.
So a lot of you may question, what Kwame was talking about there, what does that have to do with Black August or the Pelican Bay hunger strikes? And we think the answer is everything, because when you talk about the conditions at Pelican Bay or any correctional institution, again, it's important that we remember that these institutions serve the role of enforcement for the capitalist system. So what he's talking about is how these institutions work to maintain control and repression for the system. And also it's important for us to remember why the political prisoners who were incarcerated in the first place. And that reason is because they were standing up to fight the capitalist system. So the question that we come from this is, yes, let's provide material assistance and support for those who are incarcerated, who are engaging in the hunger strike and other forms of resistance against the prison industrial complex. But also, let's think about ways in which we can come together and organize against the system that perpetuates the prison industrial complex, understanding that this system, the capitalist system, and all the institutions that it represents, the government, are never going to work in the interests of the masses of people in this society. So what can you do? Well, the thing that you can do is, number one, get out a pen and a pad of paper. And I want everyone to write down what your skill sets are, the things that you can do. Some of the people watching this are chefs. You can cook wonderful dishes. Some of you are great at articulating ideas. Some are artists. Some are educators. Some can teach martial arts. Some understand how to make people laugh. Whatever skill you have, there is an organization out here that is working to organize people to make change in the society that needs your skills in it. So we're going to ask you to join an organization that's working to engage and confront this system and create power for the people in this society, in this world, and use your skills to help make that organization stronger. And if you don't see an organization that meets your philosophical desires, then you should start the none of these organizations out here can deal with me organization and use your skills to start that organization. Because until we can address how to confront this system and create a society where people are more important than money, we'll forever have a prison industrial complex, we'll forever have racist police departments that arrest people and put them in position to be incarcerated in the first place. So this is what we want to ask everyone to do, and think about that along with material support for those who are participating in the hunger strike. Please join an organization working for justice. Forward ever, backwards never. Thank you for watching.
In California, prison inmates are in the 12th day of a hunger strike. Prisoners in the isolation wing of the high-security Pelican Bay jail are refusing meals and water to protest what they say are inhumane conditions. The strike has spread to at least 6 other prisons. Tina Busherman reports.
More than 1,000 prisoners started the hunger strike on July 1st at Pelican Bay's security housing unit known as the SHU. About 200 continue the hunger strike. Many of the prisoners have pre-existing medical conditions, and activists say the health of some is deteriorating to critical levels. Linda Evans is an organizer with All or None, an advocacy group for formerly incarcerated individuals. At a press conference, she read part of a letter from a nurse who works in the prison's security housing unit.
They are not drinking water and have decompensated rapidly. Some are in renal failure and have been unable to make urine. Some are having measured blood sugars in the 30 range, which can be fatal if not treated. They've refused concentrated sugar packs and Ensure. The staff has taken them to the clinic and given them intravenous glucose when allowed by the prisoners, but most will not accept this medical support.
In a statement, one prisoner said this form of peaceful protest was their only option to change conditions, and that a core group was, quote, committed to taking this all the way to the death if necessary. California prison spokesperson Terry Thornton said they are providing the hunger strikers with medical care.
We have had just a handful of inmates who've had to receive some hydration therapy because they were dehydrated. At this point, there are no incidents or medical occurrences of inmates in distress.
California's prison system has a long history of problems. Earlier this year, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that overcrowding constituted cruel and unusual punishment. A ruling in 2001 described the prison's medical system as broken beyond repair and also in violation of the Eighth Amendment. Again, Linda Evans.
Well, the prison medical staff never believes the prisoners, None of the administrative staff, medical staff, they always feel like people are pretending or faking, and, the medical care at Pelican Bay is just absolutely atrocious.
Prisoners also want an end to Pelican Bay's debriefing policy. They say prison administration uses the debriefing policy to force them to name themselves or others as gang members, and they use access to food, medication, or further isolation in the SHU as a threat. They also want an end to 23-hour-a-day isolation in windowless, soundproof cells.